if this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong.
When we think about AI ending humanity, we picture movies about killer robots taking us down.
But the question seems to be how much of this could soon be fact.
That's the hilarity to me of the people behind AI, where you interview them and say, just how powerful is AI? And the people working in the companies are like, well, I don't want to panic people, but it is so powerful that literally the planet is in danger. What? And can we use this? Is there such power is available to us? Well, it can be. Honestly, to me, I find that hilarious. Like, if you ask people working in the companies how powerful this is, and they'll be like, it is so powerful. The outcome of that is massive media attention, government attention, people attention. It isn't that powerful.
Hi, I'm Glenn from Speak Life. We like to see all things through the lens of Jesus, including the issue of AI. Is artificial intelligence ushering in a dystopian hellscape? We talked to Rev Dr Paul Blackham about it. Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, no, thank you. Yeah, it's always great to be on with you.
You have a very refreshing take on AI. I think when a lot of people think of AI, they kind of think of Skynet and Terminator and the end of all things, including there is a video on YouTube called The AI Dilemma. It was made by people who made The Social Dilemma, which has been seen by 100 million people, about how social media is a technological advance that is a very mixed blessing in the world. And they've used that same kind of skepticism to look at the AI issue. They have a very alarming statistic. They say that 50% of all people involved in AI think that there is a 10% chance that AI will usher in an extinction level event. How on earth can we welcome this dystopian hellscape, Paul Blackham?
Well, what I like about that statistic is it's the sort of statistic you would expect from people who are marketing something as being very powerful. I'll give you the same thing that happens when Sony or Microsoft produce a new console. They've been doing this since the original Xbox. I remember they did it with the PlayStation 2, because when the new console arrives, it appears to be something, they're like, oh, the power of this. Unbelievable. It's something that should be illegal. So they usually have press releases that indicate that it is illegal. I remember they did it with the PlayStation 2, where they said, this is something which would be illegal to export to Russia. This is when they did it at the time, because it is such a powerful computing device that it breaks treaties about the exchange of cutting-edge technology. Or they did it with another one where it was like, this device is like, but it's the most powerful computing device that's ever been allowed into domestic situations and things. And so you're like, oh, what? Can I buy one? And it's like, well, okay, but you've got to pre-order. That's the hilarity to me of the people behind AI, where you interview them and say, just how powerful is AI? And the people working in the companies are like, well, I don't want to panic people, but it is so powerful that literally the planet is in danger. What? And can we use this? Is there such power is available to us? Well, it can be. Honestly, to me, I find that hilarious. Like, if you ask people working in the companies how powerful this is, and they'll be like, it is so powerful that humanity itself is threatened by it. And then it's like, oh, well, then because the outcome of that is massive media attention, government attention, people attention, constantly. It isn't that powerful. It isn't that powerful. It's something like, I was talking to someone just yesterday who is a sort of analyst of it, and they said the thing is, the large language models is the biggest hype event that they've ever known, because the perception of what people think it can do compared to what it can actually do. You know, like the imagination that it can, like, first of all, even the metaphor of artificial intelligence, I find very unhelpful, and we might get into that if you want.
Yep.
But that's my initial reaction to that sort of statistic. It's just a marketing ploy. It's not. It doesn't correspond to reality. It corresponds to a marketing hype, like the release of a console.
And so that's interesting because computer games have often been thought of as very dangerous. And I guess a kind of an 80s and 90s scare was about how violent video games were and how they're kind of rewiring the brains of the very impressionable youths who are using those computer games. That's interesting to think that actually the computer games manufacturers themselves quite like being thought of as dangerous. That's quite interesting.
Yeah.
And we do think back to the 80s and 90s and those sorts of scares as I tend to think of it as they were onto something.
Yeah.
There is a loss to having a generation of people who might be captured by computer games when they could be doing, you know, other things. That is not to be anti-computer games. It's just to say that there's a cost to anything that has benefits with it. But I think we probably recognize that the scares over computer games in the 80s and 90s have not really eventuated. And I mean, even you know, some very prominent shooters back in the 1990s in schools, that was kind of laid at the feet of computer games by some critics. But I think even now, kind of 20, 30 years on, we sort of recognize that here was a sort of a technological shift. It had an effect. There were positives and there were negatives, but it wasn't the end of the world.
Yeah, and I think what you say is very helpful in that the real analyst thing, or analytical... the best diagnosis, Neil Postman's, you know, Amusing Ourselves to Death, where he's like, it's not what you do with screens that matters so much. It's just using screens. Like, you could be researching the Bible on your screen or watching sermons. It doesn't matter. You are in this position of this passive reception in front of a screen. It doesn't matter really what you're doing with it, you know, or the medium is the message kind of thing. The medium it is a screen, a technological device that is doing something, mediating reality to you in a way that is where you're relatively passive, and all the rest. Neil Postman's stuff is the real big danger in this era of games, TV, films, computer, all of that. He's put his finger on the really big threat, what it does to us to be in that relationship to a technological device or a media machine. That's the thing. What we do with it is not so important, I think.
Yes, and that change has already happened, right?
Yeah,
so
that's done.
That boat has sailed. I remember seeing a Gary Larson comic, you know, the Far Side guy, and he had this family, and sort of the two kids were sort of lying on the carpet with their, you know, chins on their fists, and mum and dad were on the sofa, and they were just all looking at a blank space, and the caption just says, "The years before television." And I thought that was kind of what was quaint about that is that at least television sort of united the family. I mean, it united the family in a very passive way, and they could have become just, you know, dead-eyed consumers of amusement and distraction. But at least they were doing it together. Something about modern technology is that now those two kids are up in their own bedrooms, and mum and dad are probably infinitely scrolling on Instagram, and we've utterly been blown apart. So in a sense, the effect of screen technology has already gripped us, hasn't it? It
has. But if I could also, like, say, on the other hand, yeah, there was that sense in which that little family are like glued to the television in that passive way together. But now, like, you and I are interacting in two different cities, and throughout the week we will interact with people maybe all over the world. I mean, I do that nearly every day, interacting with people who are all over the world. So Not that I regard that as an unmitigated good, because I don't. I see that there's enormous complexity to that globalization, and it leads to not an increasing diversity of thought and culture, but I find it has a kind of homogenizing effect. So it doesn't lead to, like, what people thought it would lead to, it really hasn't led to. It's led to a kind of almost a tyranny in some ways, and a closing down of thought. But so that's all a thing in itself. That's about internet and what the effects of that are. That's perhaps a different conversation, but it does create a different kind of social engagement that it's less of one but more of another, and it's not that's not an unmitigated bad either.
Right. And so we need to be wise to what the benefits are as well as the cons. I mean, and technology continues to rewire us. It will continue to change not only our interactions with one another, but actually change the way we process the world. And it's worth being aware of that, not as a kind of a catastrophizing thing, but even just being literate rewires you. Like, the technology of reading and writing means that if you are a literate person in the world, not only can you read, you can't not read. And that technology has rewired you to a degree that it shows up on brain scans, to a degree that you can do psychological tests with people. And if you're a literate person, you find it very difficult if the word red is written in front of you in green letters, and if you're asked what color are the letters, you find it really difficult to say green, because your brain has been rewired by a technology that's called reading and writing. And you might spend your whole time wringing your hands saying, this is dreadful. The human person has been altered by a technology. But that ship sailed several millennia ago. And then you might think of other technologies like the printing press, which sort of pumps out literature and changes not only the wiring of the brain, but changes, the ways in which communities interact with one another, and changes the way in which church is done. Or you might think of, the motor car. So Carl Trueman, says, one of the most massive changes to church life is the fact that now, with a car, you can drive past 12 other churches before you show up at the one that has the coffee that you like. And if you're excommunicated from that church, it doesn't matter, because you've got a car, and off you go to the and so technology that has already happened has already shaped us in some quite significant ways. And so I guess I'm sense checking from you. I guess AI is the sort of technology that will change us and will take us in fresh directions, but that is not a new thing. That technology is always doing that to us.
Yeah, and again, AI, like, I don't like the title AI, because it's part of the propaganda of the people selling it, because it creates the metaphor of an agent who is intelligent, and people then imagine this kind of consciousness out there, doing things. Whereas, I don't know, I've tended to, in my own little way, I think of it as a kind of helper, assist, even the word helper or help assisting in language operations, like Halo, help assisting in language operations. So we have had this Halo assisting in help assisting in language operations, a Halo, for a long, long time. In even just whenever you search for something in a browser, that is going on. Like your search term is looked at linguistically, analysed, and then help is provided with this language operation. And that has been something that we, say for 20 years at least, has become a completely integrated feature of our life, so that we do not even notice that help as what would behind that is what we would call AI, this helper assisting with language operations. and yet it's become invisible. Initially, it was, I remember when the first time that was available to do things like that, even in the 90s, when there was very, very simple thing, and it was quite and the concept of it, and back then you were very aware in those initial months and years of how it was done. And this idea that there is a catalogue of all the websites and what's on them created as a database, which then can be searched, and then you can be referred to a finding from a day. But now the idea of knowing how it's done, nobody thinks how it's done, that there's a kind of cataloging process that's a vast database is provided and things like that, and then these are searched. You just go, it's almost invisible to us, almost like a car. Like when you initially learn to drive a car, it's a very steep learning curve, because you're like, whoa, how could you ever manage all these different things? Because this tool of travel and transportation of items and things like that, oh my God, like, how can anyone handle this? And yet if you've helped someone to drive, you're like, honestly, all of this will become invisible to you. It will be a kind of easy tool that you don't even think about using one day. And then it does. There is eventually a time when it's just complete. And that, I think, is a good analogy, because a car is a kind of exoskeleton of transport and transport, as in travel and transport, the ability to move things around. And I think this kind of AI, or the help assisting in language operations, is an intellectual exoskeleton, or even a creative exoskeleton, which initially, when you put it on, you're very like, whoa, what's going on? And it's unwieldy, and you're nervous of it. Like when a person starts to learn the use of a car, sometimes they're so scared of driving it, because they're like, but the capacity for damage, what if I run into somebody? What if I did? Yeah. Like, let's learn how to use it well. Let's go through a process of learning, one, how to just operate the thing, and also how to operate it well, safely, productively, so you're benefited and others are benefited. That sense of learning how to use it. I think that is the way to understand this, because what people do is ask, they'll say, oh, I've got into ChatGPT and I asked it to do this. And sometimes it produces a result that was better than they expected, maybe. But mostly it doesn't. It produces something quite naff or odd. Like, there was a really funny one recently. My son Jonathan and I were here, and I produced a document that was really going massive on Jesus, and it was titled Jesus at the center of everything, and it was like Jesus is brilliant kind of thing. And then we just sort of said to this, we sort of, what would happen if we gave this little document and asked it to generate an image appropriate for this? And what it did, the language model went, oh, big on Jesus, you can't have too much Jesus. So what it did, it produced a kind of Jesus a bit like that one there on the shelf behind me.
Okay, yeah.
And then he was holding a little Jesus just the same, with a beard and everything. And it was, obviously, the analytical model's like, you're going to love this. Not just one big Jesus, but a little one. He's holding
Meta
a little
Jesus
one as an extra Jesus.
Yeah, mini-me, yeah.
Yeah,
mini Jesus.
And we literally for 10 minutes were helpless, because it had analysed and gone the other, because we'd given it poor instructions. Actually, we were it was like we were driving the car and we handled it badly. We just sort of switched it on, pressed the accelerator, wham, and it's a bad result. Actually, using this help assisting language operations requires quite a lot of skill, not a lot, but initially it seems very difficult, or difficult, because you've got to specify and give examples, and what areas do you wish it to draw from, what are parameters, and all this kind of thing. And so you might actually, instead of just saying, give me a picture about Jesus, you might have to write 2 or 3 paragraphs specifying what you want with limits and operations. And then you might get something that you actually want that is assisting you usefully. But I think at the moment people do use it in just a ludicrous way, because they imagine it to be an intelligent consciousness that kind of knows things and thinks. Whereas it's not, it's just a language analyzer, and what you say is what it will do. You must give it like instructions that are meaningful, and it can do something with that. Anyway, yeah.
I love that. And we'll return to the fact that actually AI is not an intelligence, but it requires a human intelligence to actually make sense.
Yes.
To actually make sense of it. We'll return to that and all that implies about the human person and about consciousness and all that sort of stuff, because I think that's fascinating.
Yes.
But let's press into a fear that people have, because if the analogy of it's just like a car holds, I think someone who is more critical of AI will say, yes, but this becomes a self-driving car very, very quickly. And agency is handed over to the car and it becomes kind of automated. It becomes a runaway technology that kind of has an agency of its own. And wasn't there even a Doctor Who episode in which sort of sat-nav, like your GPS system kind of took over the car and actually drove you into the river against your desires? And one of the big fears of, whatever this catastrophic event might be, this extinction level event, it is that AI, we don't understand it, that even the people who are in charge of AI don't understand the very algorithms, because AI itself has generated some of these algorithms, and it becomes then a runaway technology that if it wants to survive, then all of a sudden you've got a Darwinian mechanism kind of baked into it, that suddenly this AI is told to survive. Well, survive at all costs? Well, maybe. And maybe the programming kind of takes it out of our hands and it runs away, and it becomes kind of like the self-driving car that runs you into the river. That's the fear.
Okay. Yeah, and then it creates like cyborgs to protect itself. No, okay, I get that. That is the idea, because people overestimate its capacity. You just switch off the computer and it's gone. It has no.
What if it has an override? How will not be switched off? Okay.
Yeah, that's right. And it would have to produce cyborgs that operate like power plants and things and all this. And you're like, yeah, it's gonna do it. And it's like, okay, let's settle down. Not really, but I think you're right to say that the central point about when you get help, that's why I want to think of it in terms of that help, assisting in language operations, and it's this halo. I want a halo to protect me. I like help, and you're like, yeah, you like help, but one of the things, help in all but one case, really, help is complex, because getting help from particularly from sinful humans and in a sinfully human can be costly, because it's yielding up power, control, possibilities. It's like we knew several examples of people over the past years that they got the help of, say, a mobility scooter, and it was a good help, but it made it so that once they could walk, and then because of a reliance on this help, they lost capacity until in the end they had to use the mobility scooter, whereas originally it was an option for them. But because it was such a nice help, it became something that genuinely incapacitated them, and they felt there was no way of returning to capacity because this help had been given. And I think that is the threat, that what happens, it's like let's go back to the Google search, or as it once was, Yahoo, or there were other kinds of search
Ask
engines
Jeeves.
once,
Yeah.
archaeologically. Well, if you look back in the archaeology, you find remnants of search engines that once existed. Look upon them with fear that they are, but they are gone.
Mighty
Ozymandias,
and
the search engine. Yeah. But we now I have encyclopedias on the shelf behind me for a reason.
How quaint.
To tell me to look things up, research things actively, and as much as possible, I don't search for information. If I can find it in the encyclopedias, I will force myself to do that, because I refuse that help, because if I constantly just get quick, easy information that is curated for me in a kind of digestible, globalized form, it's taking capacity from me. I know that, because then my ability, I don't retain information, because I'm like, I don't need to remember that, because I can just look it up anytime I want. And I noticed the effect of that once I retained information, like actively, purposefully, because I wanted to know and recall and remember all these things. And then I found I wasn't even doing that anymore. I said, no, I don't need to remember that, because I can look it up whenever I need it. And I'm like, no, I need to be, that's taking capacity from me. It's like the mobility scooter problem. So even the search engine, this is an old, from I think about 1971, but we have one, we have several of these big sets of encyclopedia in our home, to push us to refuse that kind of help. Or, no, you can't do it completely, but to be saying, no, I wish to retain capacities.
But you're very rare. You're very rare in that, Paul. And
yeah, I know.
Yeah, what's interesting to me, like you mentioned Neil Postman, so he begins the whole idea of amusing ourselves to death with a comparison of 1984 and Brave New World as these two kind of dystopias, in the early 20th century. One of them was about an authoritarian regime that sort of, cracks down with hard power, 1984. The other is a dystopian future in which we're just fed what we want. And that is no good for us either. And his whole thing was, probably Brave New World is what the future is, rather than 1984. And that's not in one sense preferable to 1984.
Yeah.
And what's interesting with the AI thing is the 1984 version of AI is Terminator and Skynet. But the Brave New World version of AI is WALL-E, isn't it? And you've got these incredibly fat people who are just, slurping calories into themselves completely. So and if we are with Neil Postman, that ought to frighten us as much as Terminator 2 frightens us.
Or I actually think more so, because the Terminator 2 outcome would, in that, there's the possibility of human beings being this cool resistance force and fighting back and come on, let's be a cool resistance force and fight back and switch off the machines and all that kind of thing. The other one, that never happens. There is no point at which resistance is mobilized, kind of thing, not on a grand scale. It really doesn't happen. And that's why that concept of help I use, because one of the little phrases I have written here that I remind myself of when I'm handling this, what this language model thing does, AI, it gives us what we want, not what we need. I've written that down. It gives us what we want, not what we need. So, and it will do that from trivial levels to quite serious levels and to perverse levels, like give it perverse adult industry, if we can call it that, which is, you know, a terrible name for something that's horrible. But it will do all of those things, give us what we want, and yet not what we need. And that's why that concept of help, like the book I wrote on salvation, I just called it Help, because we need help, and we are vulnerable because we desperately need help at a deep ontological existential level, because of the crisis of a fallen world and mortality and everything. We desperately need help. We need to cry out to the only one who can help us. But we won't do that. What we do is grasp at help in any and every direction. And this is a very powerful helper that will help us and give us what we need and make us feel empowered and helped. And it genuinely kind of does help. But I looked up so many scriptures about the kind of help that God gives. You know, the Lord's on my side, he's my helper, Psalm 118:7. Psalm 54:4, God is my helper, the upholder of my life. Whereas we've seen that these other kinds of help do not uphold my life. They have a tendency to help, but diminish my life or take capacities from me. But the divine helper, and we want to say, because what's powerful about the AI things is I'll ask questions and ask for help, and instantaneously there's this kind of all-knowing, all-present helper that's there to go, here, this is what you want, this is what you need. And it's like, no, there's only, why do I not speak to the, like, you know, is it in Jeremiah, or is it Jeremiah, where he says, why are you asking for help from dead things when you can ask for help from the living one? The living one. And it's like that sense of saying, he will help me, mostly, it's not exactly what I wanted.
Yeah.
It's mostly something that isn't quite what I wanted, but it is what I need. And sometimes it's the last thing I wanted, but it is what I need. And he says, come, this is where we're going to go. And it, like Peter's like, no, Lord, not that. Not that. That's the last place we want to go. And he's like, no. Satan's telling you no, because Satan doesn't care for you. It's like Steve Levy uses that example of if you've got a car that you love and you care for it, versus, say, some boys who steal it and they will use it and smash it and destroy it, whereas you care for it and you like keep it all cared for, and that's the difference. Like, Satan doesn't care for you. He will use you and pretend he's giving you what you want, but he's destroying you. Whereas the helper, like, he actually gives you hard things in a way, or what you perceive to be, but he's helping you because he's looking out for you for an eternal dimension. So that concept of help, what is the help we want? What is the help we need? And this thing is a helper, the AI, it is a helper, but it comes with dangers because it's a helper, and we are vulnerable to a cry for help. That's deep. We can't help but cry for help. And if this helper is so available and so helpful, how susceptible we are to being manipulated by the providers of it, by ourselves. I'm my worst enemy, particularly when it's like, what do I want? Like, do you know Babylon 5? In the old Babylon 5 series, and the sort of, what were the sinister, the forces of chaos called? I can't remember. There were the Vorlons and there were the Shadows, that's right. And the guy who is the representative, the question he asks people representing the Shadows, that he would just ask someone, what do you want? And they would sometimes give a flippant answer, and he's like, no, what do you want? And force that. And then we all got to realize that's the worst thing. That's the worst thing. Once you give that over to them, they will give it to you and utterly destroy you and control you. I know that's an extreme example. So for me, I'm positive about AI in many ways, but because of the human heart and the driver of this tool, So it's a very powerful tool. It's a very helpful tool. It's a leveler of a tool. And I'd like to talk about the way it levels and why creative and intellectual people don't like it, because they're like, oh, but it will take power from us and make it available to lots of people. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So it is a leveler in the way a car is a leveler in terms of travel and transport and things like that. That's all true. So it's a powerful tool. It's a helpful tool. But because of the driver, the user of it, and our capacity to destroy ourselves and each other, that's the danger.
So how do we mitigate that danger? Let's get practical now. Let's not wait till the end of the conversation. Let's get practical now. How do we avoid the Wall-E future, where we are just completely de-skilled? You know, I found myself using like sat-nav, using my GPS on my phone in order to drive like a 15-minute journey that I've driven many times before. And I just told myself, because I want to know where the traffic is. But I just wondered to myself, would I actually be able to read a map nowadays? Probably not. Do I know where I am at any one time? No, I just rely on Google Maps to do that. You've got the encyclopedias there behind you. You could talk at that granular level, but you could also talk at a more macro level. What are the sorts of things we need to do in order not to just surrender ourselves to what's easy, and to actually engage in the difficult struggles that the Lord might want us to engage with?
Yeah, so I do think, like, on a societal level, that's why I talk about that help issue. Because I think if you're not a Christian, it's very, very, I don't know what's the point almost. Like it's, you do need help, and the help you need is Jesus. And if AI isn't going to be the thing that destroys you, something else will, because you're refusing the one help that you really need. So if you're not a follower of Jesus, I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't really matter whether the government regulates it or not. You're in an incredibly hopelessly vulnerable position anyway. So, but if you're a follower of Jesus and you are like trying to say, no, my help cometh from the Lord who made heaven and earth, or I lift up my eyes to the hills. There, look, I'm looking up. Help's coming, and all that. All of that. I just think that. Let me say, the fundamental thing we must do as followers of Jesus is that thing to kind of, at an existential level, realize the help I need every day in an incredibly basic way is that help. And so that's why Jesus just says, every time you pray, our Father in heaven, just like orientate yourself in that way, because I find that makes a big difference to me, to think so just at a big level, it's a kind of existential thing. Then you get down into the granularity of it. And I don't know, it's something, I think your point, like the television point, gathering together to do something. Church is so countercultural because it is a gathering. Like, and that's what ecclesia really means. And it's this word that's used all the way through the scriptures. Moses talks about when gather the community together. Gather the community. It happens so often. Like, gather everyone together. This gathering together of a community which is like dispersed but gathers in order to connect, to worship together, to see one another. And that the face-to-faceness of the Lord, of course, let's just say, he knows what we're saying. He knows what we're thinking. Even if he's in the highest heaven, the divine emperor knows all that. And yet, there's that strange thing in the Bible, isn't it, where he says, I want face-to-face. And he comes down, and with Moses, it's a face-to-face encounter. Why bother? Why bother? He's got Zoom. He's got cosmic Zoom. But he's or whatever, But he's like, no. I want to have a face-to-face connection. And there's something deep in the DNA of church that you can't just do online church. It's possible to, as a remedial thing where a person cannot get to church. And so in that circumstance, you go, okay, that's a kind of help, but it can't actually be that, just as it's a kind of, just as romantic intimacy, it's the equivalent of that, watching other people doing it. And that's like a perverted thing to do. You think, no, that's not what it's for. It has to be skin on skin to be a real thing. In the same way, church has to be kind of skin on skin, face to face. And that way, church as a kind of countercultural movement to go, whoa, hang on. This is where we learn to be human. That's why I always define church as how, not where, because it's not a place, it's a way of life. But it's church is how we learn to be human, and to tell myself that, so that way there's this impulse to say we gather for face-to-face, skin-on-skin, and that business about greet one another with a holy kiss, or we would say, reasonably, a holy handshake. Let's not get silly. But it is a skin-on-skin thing. It's a skin-on-skin thing. It's like that particular instruction has become more important to me. Like the more this sense of like,
five times in the New Testament.
No.
It's hard to think of other commands that are repeated 5 times in the New Testament. Yeah.
Yeah, isn't it? And that's like, it's as if they know, as if whoever wrote this knew that there was going to be a problem with this. Like saying, no, you've got to get together in such a way that you can have skin on skin, face-to-face contact, because that is the revolution. So instead of the Skynet thing, and the revolution is these kind of guys where, with guns and jeeps and things like that. No, the revolution and like ministers are revolutionary leaders, like leading the resistance by saying, we gather. We have skin on skin, face to face. We gather and learn to be human and share what we have together in not just our possessions, but definitely our possessions and money. Definitely that, but not just that. Our joys, our sorrows, our trials. And we get help. The greatest help we get is from each other. We help each other. And that's the revolution. And that is educating us. It's educating us. Encyclopedias do that a little bit, but really fundamentally we're being educated as we gather as church on how to be a human being, and in such a way we're not losing capacities but gaining them.
Yes, and therefore relying on one another. Just as you want to force yourself to rely on an encyclopedia when you could Google stuff. I think there's all sorts of examples in church life where we ought to prefer relying on one another, even though we're an imposition on other people more than we would be otherwise. In the same way, you might be able to afford a removalist company coming and moving you from one house to another, but it might be even better to actually rely on your friends in the church, brothers and sisters to actually do that. And is it more of an imposition? Then okay, we'll just bung a few £100 to a removalist company, and it's a lot cleaner and simpler. I think there are a lot of examples like that where ease is actually a community destroyer. When difficulties come, it's actually a community builder, because then you can rely on actual people and take up their actual time in actual space and lean on each other in practical ways. That's kind of what church is for, really.
Brilliant point. And one of the things we found in church planting situation, lots of times, guys, younger men particularly, don't feel needed in church at all, because all the tasks that they can do are outsourced and not required. But once we locked onto that, we found that if we needed anything done, this is a mildly sexist comment, but we've just found this to be true. Like, if we wanted like walls knocked down and painting done or replastering or tiling and things like that, if you say, we need this done, who can help? Guys like to show up for this stuff, or lawns need to be mowed, or things like that. Guys like respond to that and say, I can do that. I'm not so good at, like, I don't know, other things that are
flower
but
arranging.
they kind of suddenly
Should we go
Yeah,
full
well, that-
bore
yeah.
into gender stereotypes? Yeah.
There we go. But it just seems to be a truth that and in fairness, women show up too to do these things. But there is this, like, proportionately on a curve, a lot of guys like to do that, and you sometimes see a guy's face light up when he's asked to do something. If you go, like, Bill, I know that you've got, you do that, you're good at carpentry or something. Could you help us do this? And literally the sense of like, wow, I'd love to do that kind of thing. And that's the kind of way in which church is reprogramming us. The Neil Postman thing, it's reprogramming us in learning to actually depend on each other, connect with one another, be physical and all of that. Like what you're saying, I think that's why church as not something where you learn information so much. There's some of that, but it's essentially not that. What church is learning a how-to. It's a technology in a how-to rather than a scientia and understand. I think there's far too much emphasis on the knowledge thing. You come to gain some knowledge. There is a bit of that, but think about Jesus with his disciples. The huge amount what he's doing with them is a how-to stuff. Is how-to. And then I love his leaving command. Go preach the gospel, make disciples of all the nations, teaching them how to obey the commands. And that how-to-ness of it, that's the thing that resists, because we have to help, we have to be helped and help, but there's a right way to do it, and then there's a disabling way to do it. And that's what I think the problem of AI is, how to use it in such a way that it doesn't disable us.
Yeah, use it for the things that it's good at. I mean, interestingly, we've mentioned the driving thing a number of times. I'm not aware yet of an app that is superior to sitting down with Dad in the actual car and having to bunny hop down the road, or with an actual driving instructor. There are some things that this technology is just no good at skilling us in, and making sure we use it for what it's good for, and not letting it de-skill us in the things that we ought to be embodied for. So you mentioned, Paul, about the leveling ability of AI to bring people's language abilities up. And let's compare two different technological shocks that have happened in the world. There's sort of Bernard of Clairvaux and the Cistercian monks, and they were harnessing the power of water and water mills and that sort of thing in order to lift people from the toil of drudgery. And so instead of grinding the grain, they could let the watermill grind the grain for them, and that elevated the monks and those involved in those communities in order that they could devote themselves to prayer and to one another. And so there's an ennobling ability that comes along with technology. Technology prizes the human, at least in Bernard of Clairvaux's vision. It ennobles the human, lifts the human from the drudgery of toil so that the human can work, because work is a good thing, toil is not, but we can still work, and we'll work in the new creation, and that's wonderful. And so technology enables people to be free of drudgery in order to work, and it puts the human at the heart of things in order that the human can pray and the human can be involved in those human relationships. There is an ennobling technological shock. The Industrial Revolution is another kind of technology in which power is put at the heart of all things. And that has an incredible effect on GDP, and obviously profits go up as power goes up, and people are, in one sense, lifted out of poverty. But there's a different kind of technological shock going on in the 18th and 19th centuries. I remember Matthew Boulton is quoted as saying he was a partner with James Watt in sort of being a forerunner of the Industrial Revolution, and of course bringing the steam engine. And he was asked, what do you bring to the table, Matthew Boulton? And he said something like, I offer to the world what everybody wants: power. And of course, when the Industrial Revolution happens, what you get is a real sense of dislocation and societal upheaval, and the mills just sound atrocious in terms of the conditions that are happening. And so, like, technology sometimes can be the Cistercian thing and can sometimes be the Industrial Revolution thing.
Okay, so let me just make a proviso that Bernard of Clairvaux and that approach to technology is deeply grounded in church life, a Christ-centered. Bernard, all his Jesus hymns, oh, we love them. I can't even sing them without bursting out crying because there's a Jesus man. And then, so for him, technology is made to genuinely assist in a way that keeps the helper at the center of attention and all that. Love it. Love it. But the Industrial Revolution, if I can just put this proviso in, so what happens between him and, say, the 19th century is an abandonment of that foundation on which technology would sit culturally, civilizationally. So that now, to have machinery and technology that ennobles and enables human beings to spend more time doing what is faithful, that is people-focused, in serving other people and engaging with other people, faithful and fruitful, what we're designed to be for. That isn't what happens with technology in the 19th century. What it comes is the technology becomes a servant and then a master of profit, progress, wielded the opposite of Bernard's view. Bernard's like, let's have it so that this is for everybody. What it becomes is an elite-driven system that chews up millions, like in me from the north of England, the Industrial Revolution. And on my mum's side, I remember visiting grandparent in Preston who could remember serving in cotton factories and things like that. That was a tough, very, very tough life. And you would go back a previous generation or two to that, and there'd be life expectancies very low because it was driving people into the drudgery and burden. The very things that Bernard would say, no, that's what technology is supposed to prevent. And now it's created it because anything, no matter how good it could be, once it's disconnected from Christ, you would say, love and sex, how could that go bad? That's probably what Jesus was thinking in Eden. This can never go bad. This is so good. And then of course we're like, whoa, it can only go bad maybe. And he's like, and food, how could food go bad? Food can go bad. But, it's a tremendous problem. There's nothing that once it's disconnected from Christ at the center won't be bad. So technology is the same. It can be good. It can be a lead to faithfulness and fruitfulness when it's sitting on a safe foundation or useful foundation. When it isn't, it can just, no matter how good its capacity and no matter what possibilities for good are in it, few of those will be realized and bad things will be realized.
Okay, so the industrialization of the 18th and 19th centuries are all about progress and power and profit. So bring us now to AI, and here's another technology that is a great leveler, and we can talk about the ways in which everybody can now be upskilled and use language to the level that some of the most gifted orators and word users use language. And so now we're all kind of on a level playing field because of AI. Is that technological development, is that more like a Cistercian watermill, or is it more like kind of Gradgrind's mill in Hard Times from Charles Dickens? Is it more a utopian vision, or is it a more dystopian vision? Tell us about some of the ways in which AI can help and some of the mixed blessings that might be as we all level up in our language abilities.
So having made that proviso, like technology is safe if it's sat upon a foundation of Christ, because then its possibilities for good can be realized. Without that, its possibilities for evil can be realized. But it is a leveler, and that particularly this one, the Halo thing, the help for assisting in language operations, is that for lots of us, for most of us, we're not that skillful. Like, language is this gift from the Trinity to us. Language is eternal. It's always existed. The Trinity, and then given us language. Not uniquely, angels have it too, and so on. But we are given this, but in our fallenness, there's particularly particularly if we are disabled in language use for all sorts of cultural reasons, we're very limited in our language capacities. To be able to do things with language, and here we're now talking about language in a big sense, language in visual arts as well, the language of a picture as well as poems and prose and so on. What it enables is, if you are given a little bit of training, like a car user, a little bit of training in using this tool, it enables this enormous extra, like the exoskeleton thing, that lots of people are now capable, have within themselves the capacity to produce lots of language output, creative output, that they couldn't have before, and levels it. So, okay, there is still, like, the power users of it. There's a few people who are very, very skillful at using it, like a Formula One driver driving a car. They're insanely good at driving cars, and then they're like this. Like, there's a tiny number who are insanely good at using this, or even or just are so good at creative output and language that they're still like that. Okay, there's a few, but they're not relevant to this conversation in a way. That's just like that's like a kind of a special tiny group. But for most people, this does have this capacity to make it possible. But that means that there's a sense of threat to that. Just as the weaver of the 18th century is deeply threatened by the arrival of something that can do what they can do, they're brilliant at doing something. And now it doesn't matter whether they're brilliant at it or not. Here's a technology that will do 1,000 times what they can do in a single day. And so that does have a huge impact on their skill. Their skill, like, to be able to weave brilliantly, nowadays, it's irrelevant. Nobody cares. But once, that was an amazingly useful thing. Similarly, I suspect there will be quite a lot of that in 20, 30 years' time, that lots of people who are making money and careers out of being fairly good at language and creative output, they won't have employment in the same way anymore. It just isn't necessary. Just like the weaver.
Yeah. I mean, it's already happening at the moment, isn't it? I mean, we run these intensives down here at Speak Life, and we get together people who are into creative communication. And so if you love theology, if you love mission, if you love creativity, we kind of want to sit at the heart of that Venn diagram and teach people how to, creatively communicate Christ. And so we've got all sorts of graphic designers and illustrators and artists and that kind of thing. And, and in one sense, we have already leapfrogged over some of those creators, because when we run our 3-2-1 course, for instance, we've got AI-generated art and animation. And, some of the artistry that we use in our creative communication is not, designed from the hand of a graphic designer who maybe spent 3 years at university and has been plying their trade for 10 years. And I think we're already at the stage of, just as in the Industrial Revolution, leaving behind a whole class of people, potentially. And could not the AI revolution be just as disruptive, or perhaps even more disruptive, than the Industrial Revolution, which led to all sorts of social upheaval?
Yeah, absolutely. The social upheaval is at that level. So again, it's the weirdness when people are saying the threat is Terminators and Skynet. I'm saying, no, that's not the way to be thinking about this. The threat is the one disabling thing that we've thought about, but also this social disruption that we've built a society, a modern Western society, one global society, that were certain kinds of intellectual, linguistic, creative skills are very lucrative and loads of employment opportunities. And they are going to mostly be lost. Mostly lost. There will be a few very good people, like the Formula One driver style thing, who still will have that. But for the vast majority of the weavers, the 18th century weavers today, the language, creative, design people, they're on the precipice of an industry that is like an 18th century, or the agricultural revolution, any of these revolutions.
Or even like coders. Isn't it interesting that like 10 years ago, learn to code was kind of a pejorative phrase that was bandied about on the web, because coding was a job that you'll always need because the future is technology. And now AI codes far better than the vast majority of humans. So even in industries that you might think were safe from being disrupted by tech, even jobs within tech are being disrupted by tech. This is an incredible upheaval.
Yeah, that's this huge revolution, and will be extremely disruptive, more than perhaps people currently realize. It will impact education as well, all kinds of things that intellectual and creative tasks. Like there's a guy at St John's Leytonstone who is retired now, but he used to work at the BBC, and he says in the 70s, video editing was done with, it was these plastic strips on which the film existed as an analog physical thing, and it was splicing them, cutting them, and it was an incredibly difficult skill, and it was like a manual task. It was it required manual dexterity to do this, and how long he would say it would take to do these sort of 1 minute sequences would be an entire day of his team, and they'd be doing, and then that, to be very good at doing that now, it's like, whatever, dude. Nobody requires that. Nobody requires that. And that's displaced by video editing software, which is now, even video editing software, it's like, what are you using that for? Why are you manually doing that? You don't need to do any of that sort of thing. And it's that sense of displacement, which we've hardly experienced. So lots of changes in employment patterns and new employments arise, which are hard to anticipate now, but new employments arise that require very different sets of skills and possibilities.
Yeah. And, so Karl Marx was writing about the horrors of industrialization, and what he was saying was not wrong about the horrors of, women drugging their children because they had to take them to the mill to work these 14-hour days. And so what did they drugged children so that the mother could, make pins in the pin factory or whatever it was. And the upheavals that led to revolution all came out of this technological shock. And so you're not saying we're safe from that. You're saying we're safe from we're safe from HAL, we're safe from Skynet, possibly, probably.
Yeah.
But we are not safe from our own desires enslaving us, and we're not safe from the social upheaval.
Exactly, and technology always has a cost. No technology is uniformly an unmitigated good. Is no of them. Even they might say, planes traveling around the world, it makes the whole world accessible. Okay, but there's, climate change people would go, that's terrible, fuel expenditure. Okay, but even leaving that aside, there's a kind of culture dilution of becoming a global village, where the distinctiveness of cultures are under threat and people feel threat. That's a whole nother conversation about that sense of a global village is not cost less. There are threats and problems, even the spread of disease on a global scale rather than a local scale. There are always costs to every technology. Same with this, like, help assisting language operations. The Halo, it's okay, yeah, but as we've seen, what is the weird thing is what people think the danger is. I'm saying, no, the dangers that are being said. To me, there's something almost weird about the what people are saying are the dangers, because they're not the dangers. The dangers that are real and happening, the disabling and the social disruption, are happening without being examined properly and being... Where people are trying to say, how are we going to defend against Terminators? I'm like, oh, forget that. Forget that. But how are you going to defend against things that are now? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think let's finish with this, because I do think as we face whatever technology is happening, whether it's the technology of the written word or the printing press or water mills in Cistercian monasteries or the Industrial Revolution or computing or social media or AI, I think two questions often come up in my mind, and that is how do we preserve the human and how do we preserve hope? And let's not have the hope that is just what the industrialists of the 19th century had, which is just that, GDP will go up and we'll make more profits. But a hope that actually might require something of us in the short term in terms of, sacrifice and other-centeredness and leaning on each other in community. But having gone into, the way of Jesus, the way of the cross, there is it's ultimately going to be okay. An extinction level event is not going to happen because of AI. Okay. The Lord will return when the Lord returns. Yeah. And that is a hopeful event for the people of Christ. So hope is something that ought to be sounded as a note in all of what Christians say about technology, whatever there is. There might be a down, and it will call forth from us a lot of sacrifice. But there is ultimately a good future that the Lord is bringing us towards. But also the human. We need to preserve hope, and we need to preserve the human. And this is why I appreciate you not calling AI artificial intelligence, but a helper for the human, because whatever technology shocks happen, and whether it has environmental concerns, great. Let's have creation care that puts the human as something that the Lord has placed on planet Earth as a little lower than the angels, and has crowned with glory and honor in the Lord Jesus, and the human has a future. And so whatever we say about AI, whatever we say about the environment, let us have a vision for the human that is as positive as the Bible's vision of the human. And as we bring that to the world, I think we've got something very distinctive to say about this technological development. We are not heading towards a post-human world. Post-Christians might think in very post-human ways, but that only goes to show that it's Christianity that gives the true vision of the human. And so I would say that Christians have a real contribution to make now as AI is being developed to put the human front and center, wouldn't you say?
I love what you're saying. It's like people worry because a lot of the people who are investing and hyping AI, as it's falsely called, are transhumanist people. We know that. And I always want to call them subhumanist people, because everything that they aspire to is subhuman. They're like, we're going to go beyond humanity. And I say, in what sense? And it's like, we wish to be disembodied. And I'm like, whoa! Like, that's incredibly subhuman. That's like you've gone under, not over. Like, that's a ludicrously poor thing. Like, the living God, designed the universe in order to become flesh in it. And he's like, the living God from all eternity is striving into the very thing you're trying to get out of. Like, what absurdity. Like, in order to understand what it is to be human, we look at Jesus. Like as it Psalms, the Psalm 8, Hebrews 2, they look what we do not see all that humanity is designed to be, to rule over the heavens and the earth, to be kings and queens of creation, to stride through the stars for all eternity. But we see Jesus. And it's as if keep your eyes always on him, because that is what you are. That's your destiny, because he has become you in order that you can become what he is. And all of that sense of, like, don't try to compete with the capacities of these large language models. And people say, oh, but it diminishes us as humans because there's, this thing can draw pictures faster than I can or better than... No, don't try to compete with that. That's not your uniqueness. Even if you lose the capacity of speech entirely, you are no less human. You are no less human. You're no less loved and treasured and destined for this never-ending story in Jesus. And no matter how good this computing device can analyze language and produce outputs, it cannot be seated with Christ in the heavenly realms and live and reign with him. And it's not designed for that. It's designed to do these kind of this worldly little tasks as a tool. Every one of us is destined and designed for that. And whether we accept our destiny and design, that's a tragedy in itself. But that's what it is for. And that way in which we love to say in our church pants sometimes, when we turn to prayer, we'll say, we're going to turn to prayer now. And the significance, this is this unbelievable, impossible miracle. And in the highest heaven, the third heaven, and at the highest level of all reality, there are these 4 living creatures that are so insanely amazing that if you see them, you would just start worshipping them, even though you shouldn't. And yet they cannot approach the very throne of God and are given wings to protect themselves from the presence of such a thing. And yet what we are about to do is invoke the name of our brother and friend and helper Jesus, and they will step aside and say, please, you go through. This is your place, not ours. Not ours. We are going to do that now. We're going to pray. And we're going to this sense of wow, any human can do that. And regardless of language capacities, just even the groaning that cannot form words, language things, is something that if he hears even the raven when it croaks, it hears the throne of heaven. He hears us. He hears us. And it is not the angels, even the angels who are uber technically competent, but as he comes to be one of us and aid and help us. That is the helper, the maker of heaven and earth. And just on the tech thing, if I can just say this, there is technology in the new creation. If you look at the descriptions of the new creation, there are things that are evidence of technology there, even just architecture that's there. And it's that sense that there's technology itself. I like your hope point. Everything about us now is this complicated thing, full of blessings, full of curses. And that technology, you might say, oh, this is the future of humanity. Or people put their hope in it for salvation, or they fear it's the damnation, the extinction event. And I'm saying, no, none of those things. The world ends when he returns. When he returns, that's the end of history. That's the extinction event of this present order. Him. We take him seriously and fear him. Fear him, his return. And then the whole world will tremble, and every eye will see, and they'll be aghast that they'll look upon him whom they have pierced. That is the thing to fear in terms of extinction level event, but not then to transform from the fear of him, or fear to run away from him, but have that fear that loves him and run to him when he appears out of joy and look on him the pierced one and look on those glorious wounds kind of thing. But to have the hope that I know who holds the future, and he guides me by his hand. The eye of the Lord is on us to guide us and so on. So I always want that tremendous hope, and not to take these technologies that seriously. Not that seriously. The thing that we take really seriously is, as we were saying, we gather as church and do something that is outrageously impossible. Join in with angels and archangels and all the company of heaven, and go beyond that, like the angelic company of heaven, and seat with Christ on the heavenly throne and participate in the divine nature and drink from the fountain of life. And we're like, wow, what is all this nonsense compared to that?
Right. Yeah, a great note to finish on. Putting the human at the center. If post-Christianity is post-human, it just goes to prove that Christianity was always the original, true, and only humanism. And yeah, the hope of the Lord Jesus is what we set our hearts and minds on, even in the midst of this evil age, in which, there are blessings and there is technology to use, and it can dignify people, it can enable people. We need to watch out for our own desires, which might enslave us. We need to be very sensitive to the social upheaval that is all around us. But this technology has been with us for some time, and it's something that we can negotiate in a Christian way, and that actually our Christian distinctives, as we lean into one another in church community, are a huge attraction to a society that has no hope, that has no real grounding for their intuitions about the human, and who is enslaved to its own desires. And so here we hold out the word of life, we lean into one another in embodied community, and we really do have the answer in Christ if the world will turn and listen. Paul, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom on this. If people want to keep up with you, I know you've got a wonderful podcast that people can listen to. Tell us about the podcast, and tell us other ways that people can keep up with you.
Yeah, the podcast is The Christ-Centered Cosmic Civilization. It sounds like a ludicrous title, but it kind of is the only thing I could come up with that covers the range of what's on that. I also run a thing called the Bible School Show, bibleschool.show. That's just a Bible study, church history, and theology week by week. And then, of course, book by book. All the book by book Bible studies, which you've been on. You are a wonderful guest on the book of Job, which I've just been enjoying this last week. We do books of the Bible, produce TV programs, study guides on that. That's it. That's me.
That's awesome. I hope people catch up with Paul in all the ways that they can. Paul Blackham, thank you so much for being on the channel.
Thanks so much, Glenn.